laughing and back, just talking about good news over the years in this community. Every Sunday, good news has its own energy. Today felt really deep and rich and big stuff. We've had the weeks where man, what's your good news? I got free weed, or I got one tire. No one else? Okay, great. Yeah, it's me. It's me. I have been reflective all year because I think big dates are coming up. I don't know if it does it to you. My wife just turned 40, which is huge, right? Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to be married 18 years in about a month, which is insane. Thank you for clapping, one person for a marriage. That's good. I like that, solid. But my marriage is finally turning 18, becoming an adult, and it feels like that in our relationship that it's taken that long to kind of become adults with one another. And as I've thought about that, I was thinking about when I was 12 years old, ready to get married to my wife. I think I was 21, so it wasn't that far off, right? Classic Christian college kind of kid. I did not even have a frontal lobe yet, which is crazy. I think the crazier thing is not just proposing to my wife, but all of the other evangelicals that we asked, and they're like, "This is a great idea. This is smart, do it. Yeah, then you can have sex, that'll be awesome." Joke's on them, we were already doing that. But, there you go. Sex fans, I like that. That's good. Let me look around the room real quick, kids. Okay, great, yeah, that's. But what I think about is it was one of those moments in life where I felt like I clearly heard from God. And I don't always feel that way, but you feel almost like it's audible. You know this to be true. And I remember praying and asking God, should I marry Carissa? And I remember hearing this so clearly, which was, if you marry Carissa, your life will be beautiful, and it will be good, and it will have its own challenges, and you will miss out on some things. And if you do not marry Carissa, your life will be beautiful, and it will be good, and it will have its own challenges, but you will miss out on some things. So choose. And I remember that so clearly as a little baby, right? Hearing that from God. And I made the choice, obviously, to get married, and it's all been true. And I don't think I understood fully what it meant, the impact of marrying her or making that choice, or what any of those choices mean in our life. That I have to choose relationship, and that I have to choose responsibility, and that by choosing this particular relationship, and by choosing the responsibility that comes with it, that is what's going to impact the transformation that I have in my life. And if I chose to be single, the relationships that I would have made there and the responsibilities that I would have chosen there would have impacted the transformation that I was going to have in my life. But at the end of the day, it's a choice. Our choice is one of transformation, and we can choose it all kinds of different ways, but our choices do end up mattering. And so today I want to think about this big idea of transformation. It's something that I'm obsessed with. I talked about it a lot on Easter, is that I think that what we're being transformed into is love. That's something that we would all agree on that we want for our lives. If we believe that God is love, there's no one in this room that says, I don't want to have more capacity to love. I don't want to have more capacity to be loved or receive love. I want to be able to love into this world. And I think out of love is the way that I'm going to live the fullest life as a human being. It's going to shape who I'm becoming and really what I do in the world. But I think as we think about being transformed, how we are transformed is through relationship and through responsibility. And the second thing, the responsibility part, I think is interesting, and we'll get there eventually, because really in this season of New Abbey, I think it's been a season of us growing up, a season of us maturing, a season of us choosing responsibility in a different way. There's been seasons of New Abbey where we're just great at healing. We're great at safety. We make the tent as big as humanly possible, and it's almost like we're scared to talk about some things. But what I realized is it was limited. Because at the end of the day, you have to choose responsibility at some point. You have to choose maturity. You have to choose growing up. You will eventually have to choose boundaries for your thriving. And it's scarier to talk about, but I think it's incredibly important. And we're in this journey in the Gospel of Mark. And in the Gospel of Mark, we see Jesus inviting people into this process of transformation. And this process of transformation is one in which people see the life of Jesus. They're invited into relationship, and eventually they're invited into responsibility to share in this bigger, fuller life that Jesus has for us. So if we're going to talk about transformation through relationship and responsibility, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about transaction versus transformation and kind of the narratives that we've been given. And if we can talk about that, then we can talk about relationships. If we can talk about relationships, then we'll go down a little bit of a rabbit hole because what a good time. And if we can talk about going down a rabbit hole, then there's nothing quite like a reference 4 years too late of Tiger King. You all know what you were doing when you were sitting there in the middle of COVID, just wondering what was happening to the world. You were watching Tiger King, like every other human being. And if we can talk about Tiger King, then we can talk about responsibility, because you see how those things go together. And if we can talk about responsibility, then we can talk about the elementary school annual fundraiser that I was just at, because you know it's a Sunday morning. Most of us were given a narrative about God that is rooted in transaction, and most of the work that we do at New Abbey is providing you a different, more robust narrative of God that is rooted in transformation. The narrative of transaction goes something like this. And I want to slow this down because often I make jokes about it, but I'm not always sure it's registering with everyone, so I want to create some space for it. The transactional narrative of God is that there is a perfect, holy God out there. This perfect, holy God created human beings like 6,000 years ago in a garden. Everyone, this feels familiar so far? I always joke, I'm like, these belly buttonless people, if you don't get the joke, because they weren't born, so they wouldn't have belly buttons, and I think that that's funny, okay? So these belly buttonless people are in a magical garden in which a magical snake and a magical tree exist. I know I'm poking fun, but this is the story that you've been given. A literal transactional story. These people didn't do the game well, and then the woman, shame on her, thousands of years of abuse because of the story, right? Listened to the magical snake and ate a piece of fruit. And because of that, humanity has been condemned to sin for all of history. Does this sound familiar? This is a transactional story that takes place. So then what God does is God wants to enter into covenant with humanity, and so God gives the 10 Commandments, and we go through all this story, and really all that is a story to prove that humanity is imperfect, and they can't keep the laws, and they can't do what's right, and so this holy God can't trust them. I'm not making it up, right? This is the story that you've been given thus far. So then Jesus needs to come to show you the right way to live, and Jesus knows that you can't do it, and Jesus knows that his dad is one angry SOB, and so Jesus needs to die for you because you're a horrible human being. I know I'm slightly making fun, but this is the narrative that you have been given. That is a transactional story in which you have been fated for failure since the beginning, and that the only way that you make it is because of Jesus dying to his angry father. Again, I know that I'm making it crazy, but this is the narrative that we were given, and we were told to make sense of it. And now that God is happy with you because of what Jesus did, one day you will go to heaven, and other people who do not choose the proper transaction with God, they will be doomed to hell forever. I remember asking a pastor of 30 years when I was an undergrad in biblical studies and theology the question that every teenager would ask, but what about all those people who never heard about this Jesus, or they were on that island, or whatever it may be? And I was told with a stone cold face, well, they're just going to hell. It's that simple. And it's our job to go out there and tell people about this Jesus so that they can be on the proper side of the transaction. Does that feel like a fair narrative that you have heard? Now let me present a broader narrative that I would say is actually more true to Orthodox Christian belief, to what the scriptures actually say, and that it actually can work for your life. And it has nothing to do with a transaction. It is only rooted in transformation, in a good God who understands humanity's deep desire to constantly be transformed, to grow, to evolve, to become, to discover this infinite universe that this good God has created for us. The story of Genesis 1 through 11 is really not that interesting to the early Jewish people. Cosmology is a fancy word for where do we come from and kind of how did we get here. The early Jews were not interested in cosmology as we were. They tell us stories about the garden, or they tell us stories about creation to combat the empire narratives of their day. So they tell us a story about this God who creates in 6 days, because there's another story in the ancient world called the Enuma Elish. By the way, we're getting real boring and nerdy, so I hope you're keeping track with me so far. We good? Great. And so that was an empire story in which the gods created human beings to be servants. So the Jews come along when they're in captivity in Babylon, and they use the exact same story of the empire, but they turn it on its head. The Enuma Elish happens in 7 days. The oceans are split. Literally, go day by day, it's the exact same story. But here's the fun part about that. We didn't know that until 300 years ago because of archaeology. We just didn't have the information. That doesn't make us evil. We just didn't know because no one had dug it up yet and learned, oh, we copied this story and we made it our own. This isn't a story that's meant to tell how human beings got here. The Bible doesn't account for evolutionary history. This was a fun one. I remember learning this like 6 years ago. Do you know that on planet Earth, 30,000 years ago, there were 6 human-type creatures that are not here on planet Earth today? That should blow your mind. Right? There was Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and a subspecies in Indonesia and Australia. That has nothing to do with my sermon. That was just for free. You're welcome. My point is, it's not what the Bible was trying to solve. The Bible was not interested in saying, this is when consciousness happened and here's how we got there in evolutionary history. It was simply trying to tell you this about humanity. You are here now and you are good. And you are made in the image of a creator. And if this God creates in goodness, then you are a creator. You are not slaves to your history. This is what the Old Testament is trying to tell you. There will never be a pharaoh or a system that will oppress you, no matter who you are. Because you are a human being, you can create your own future. That's a little bit different story than the transactional one that you were given. So the early Genesis stories are just trying to remind you of what's most true about what it means to be human, about what we're capable of doing. Pause here a second. It's also not trying to get rid of this idea of sin. I don't believe in original sin. Original sin has not been around since the beginning of the early Christian church. It's not an agreed upon idea. Original sin just simply means that Adam and Eve made a choice and the fate of humanity has suffered because of it from the beginning. I think the Bible is very interested in sin. It's not interested in original sin. All that sin is it's trying to talk about how hurt people. It's trying to talk about the palpable disruption of shalom. It's trying to say that as human beings, there's wholeness in the world, which is what holiness means, by the way. Holiness has nothing to do with the idea of perfection. It just means wholeness, and that we all long for wholeness, and that when we are hurt, we are incapable of participating in wholeness. Because I know in my life, when I hurt, I tend to hurt myself, and I tend to hurt other people around me. So the Bible is interested in the reality that we sin, that we participate in hurt as human beings, which is another way of saying we don't always know how to care for ourselves because growing up takes time, which is why there's a story of people in a garden and infancy and they grow up. The whole Old Testament is this larger narrative of growing up. Growing up in relationship with God is what it's trying to bring you into because it takes time. And as you grow up, as you get instruction, like the commandments and these different laws, that helps you to thrive as a human being. It helps you to understand what it looks like to live well. And as you do that, you'll learn to care for yourself. And as you properly care for yourself, you'll eventually be able to care for your neighbor, and you'll eventually be able to care for the world and other people. That's what those stories are trying to teach you. But oftentimes as human beings, we don't know how to care for ourselves. We only know how to cope, and often we cope out of our own hurt and pain, and we would call that sin. Is this all tracking with you so far? I know it's a lot of ideas, but sometimes I got to just slow it down here to say the things that we're talking about here is trying to offer you another idea. And if, by the way, if you're like, man, this sounds crazy, is this heresy, whatever, there's literally thousands of books on this for all of Christian history. and just invite you into fun little fact. Christianity today on planet Earth, 50% of Christians are Catholic, 25% of Christians are Greek Orthodox. The other 25%, slow down, Corey. Just have a little bit of water, don't have all the coffee. Another 25% of Christians are Protestants. Less than 10% of those are evangelical. But you would have been thought that because you read Left Behind books and know Kirk Cameron, that all Christians are evangelical. No. It's just that evangelical Christians in the last 30 years were the most powerful Christians that the world ever saw because we had the most money that the world's ever seen. And so when we print Bibles, we print Bible versions that fit our narrative because we choose the words that we interpret, and we ship that across seas. And we shipped across seas a transactional view of God, not a transformational one. And we shipped a transactional version of God across seas because we're Americans. And what we do in the world is transactional. And we don't actually know suffering in our powerful sectors of society. And so the story of transformation is one about suffering and growth. And if you're the most powerful people in the world, you don't want suffering through growth and love. You want a transaction. Welcome to the present. So the story of transformation is all throughout the scripture. It's just not the story that we were taught. The early church only taught this story of transformation. They called this process theosis. And they would teach that when Jesus comes along, Jesus shows us this full story by doing two things. One, Jesus reminds us fully, right? Jesus opens up the story universally. So where the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament is saying God's picking a group of people, in Genesis 12, when God makes covenant with his people, God says, I'm going to bless you, but I'm blessing you for one reason, so that you will learn to bless the world. That's built in really early on. That's wildly inclusive. Transactional doesn't like inclusive, by the way. Why powerful people love a transactional story of God is because somebody gets to own the transaction. Oh, you're Catholic? You're going to hell. Oh, you're Protestant? You're going to hell. Oh, you're gay? You're going to hell. Oh, you're this? It's the most powerful card that we had for thousands of years. I own how the transaction looks. This doesn't have anything to do with your relationship and transformation with Jesus and the responsibility that you have to care for yourself, the world, and others. This just simply has to do, are you agreeing with the person who's giving you the transaction? I'm trying to flip a bunch of stuff upside down today, people, and we're not even to the Bible passage yet, which is going to go quick. I'm just trying to say that this process of transformation has been there all along, just most of us in the American context have never been given it. And so the early church did this process of theosis where it was two parts. One is just reminding that you are made in the image of God. And that was wildly revolutionary 2,000 years ago when like Caesar and a few of his buddies owned everything. I know it sounds very different than the world we live in today. But if you were a bunch of early Christians, they would have these things called love feasts. And they would call each other followers of the way because they would arrange their life around this transformation of love of Jesus. And one of the things that they would arrange it around is that when you came and sat at this table, it didn't matter if you were a senator. It didn't matter if you were poor, whether you were Jew or Greek or male or female or master or slave. When you came to this table, you were reminded of the truth of humanity, that all of us sitting here are made in the image of our Creator. That disrupts empires. The second thing the early church would teach you is just because you are made in the image of God doesn't always mean you act in the likeness of God. That's the hard part. That's the growing up part. That's the maturity part. And that's the your responsibility part. And so they would go with people through a process of moving into the likeness of God. So the difference between transaction and transformational is huge, and most of us just haven't been given that narrative clearly. And by the time that we get to Jesus, here's my proof that transaction is not interesting to Jesus. If Jesus came to deal with the transaction that went wrong in a Garden of Eden, why does Jesus never mention it one time? Why were you never told that? Didn't you think Jesus would come and say, guys, that magical snake really got Eve. Shame, shame, shame. You know what I'm here to do? To die for all of you and die a bloody death so that my dad will be happy with you again. Jesus never uses words like that. Isn't that crazy that you've never been told that? He never uses words like that. The Old Testament never repeats the story of the garden. Not one time. Google it right now. If it was a transactional story that something went wrong in the garden, and what God is trying to do is to finally be able to look at his creation through holy, perfect eyes, then don't you think the Old Testament would repeat the garden story again and again and again and again and again and again? It never brings it up again. You know what the Old Testament talks about again and again and again and again and again? It talks about this idea of you've been freed by God from Pharaoh in Egypt, which is a universal story of you will all be in oppression at some point, some time in your life. Maybe it will be systematic oppression. Maybe it will be to an addiction. Maybe it will be to your own pain. But you will need freedom, and that freedom will need to come outside of yourself, and we call that thing God. And once you have freedom in your life from whatever that oppression is, the hard thing is now that you have freedom, you don't always know how to live yet. And now God wants to give you covenant and laws so that you can know how to live into the freedom that you've been given. Because before you were a slave, and now you are a free, and when you were a slave to whatever the thing was, no one taught you how to live over here. But now God wants to tell you how to live and show you so that you can thrive. And so then Jesus picks up on this story, and Jesus uses language like kingdom for a reason. I'm not like that kingdom out here. I'm this kingdom, and this reality and this kingdom is for all people. And Jesus says, why have I come? I have come that you may have life, and life to the fullest. That's why I've come. And there's a good God out there who wants to transform you. So then, by the way, this is a lot of theology. If you are so bored out, you came on the wrong Sunday. But atonement is a big thing that we talk about in the world of church. You were told that Jesus had to die to atone for your sins. Jesus is dying to transform for your sins. So the atonement, that's literally like 40 more minutes, and I wouldn't do that to you because that's not humane. But the atonement is a theory that evolves over literally 1,500 years in the church to what we got in the West, but it's not where the church started. Where the church started is that Jesus came to model for you what happens when pain, betrayal, death, grief, loss happen in your life. And why will those things happen in your life? Because sin is real. Hurt, damage, pain, the people that are closest to you, the relationship that you thought that would never do that. These are all in Jesus' stories. And so Jesus models for you the final process of transformation. Even when everyone left him, killed him, when the structures destroyed him, when his family wasn't there, when the people that he invested in didn't care for him, even when all of that happened, Jesus dies. And when he is resurrected, guess what Jesus did not do? I'm going to go mess some of you mother effers up right now. You did to me, now I'm going to do back to you. That's what we do when we're immature and hurt. No, Jesus does the ultimate in the resurrection story. My wounds are still here. Look at them. Touch them. And they might be from you. That's my scar. That's from my mom. That's from my family of heritage. This is because of my addiction choices for 30 years. Whatever your scar may be. But Jesus says, now do you want to know what transformation looks like at the end of this thing? Even after I have died, gone through the betrayal, gone through the grief, I will no longer transmit the pain. I will transform the pain. That's the story. And then Jesus offers to everyone, do you want that life? Because hurt will be there. Pain will be there. Grief and loss and difficulty will be there. Do you want a story of a transaction of an angry God who's mad at you and will only be right because his son suffers and dies for you? Or do you want a story where you are created in the image of a good God, and this God wants you to create your life? And when you create your life, you will have to deal with the hurt, pain, sin that is in it, and it will be a lifetime and process of transformation. And when you are growing in your transformation, one day you will stop transmitting your pain and you will start transforming it. And as you start transforming your pain in the world, then you begin to leak. And as you begin to leak your transformation in the world, then more people get to be invited to your table, and now they're reminded of the truth that they're made in the image of a creator and that they get to turn into the likeness of God. Does that story sound a little bit more holistic to you? Great. Now we're going to do the Bible passage in like 3 minutes. Mark chapter 3. Follow me. He appointed 12 that they may be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. I think we missed the part of the passage, so I'm going to pull it up on my phone. It goes like this. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Then he gave the name, some B name, which means sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon, the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. And we don't name kids Judas anymore. Okay. It's not a popular name. Where we get to in the Gospel of Mark and why this is maybe one of the most important parts of the story is this, is that you were just told a story about transaction that if you didn't accept Jesus, you were going to hell. And I remember somebody telling me, well, Corey, if you don't believe hell, then why believe any of this? Because the gift is Jesus. It's not about what I'm not getting, it's about what I am getting. It's about what I am being offered. And this is the invitation here. It's an invitation to relationship and responsibility. We've pointed this out quite a bit in the Gospels of Mark, but you'll notice that the crowds will come and come and come and come to Jesus, and it says that Jesus told all of them this good news, that they are loved, that they are children of God, right? And Jesus healed all of them. And as we say at New Abbey quite a bit, what's good about Jesus is that Jesus leaves everybody better than he finds them. And so Jesus is inviting us into that journey of leaving people better off than we find them. In the passage right before this, it's Jesus out on a lake, everyone's around him, he's just being swarmed, he heals everybody, and then he goes off to the side. And when he goes off to the side, this is when he calls the 12 apostles. He's already had disciples, but what he's saying is, you've seen this process, now I want to invite you into transformation in a different way. And if you don't choose it, it doesn't mean hell. I'm just offering you the way to life and life full. If you want that, that's your choice. And here's the thing that I have freedom about as the pastor up here. I'm not here to convince you of that. What I'm here to do is to create a community that fosters it so that when you see the people around you and the way that they're healing and transforming and maturing, you're like, I want that. That looks good to me. Oh, you can stand up here and say that you've had 10 years of recovery? I need that. Oh my gosh, you're living such a fulfilled life that you have a homeless neighbor, and instead of doing what I know that I do, drive by most of the time, you entered into a relationship with this woman, and you got to know her name and her story, and you found a lawyer, and you asked, and you raised $10,000 for this person so that she may thrive. I want that. I want that. That's the kind of human being that I want to be. That's what Jesus invites you into. And so the first thing he says is that when Jesus called them, the first thing he says, and you get to be with him. That's relationship. This isn't a sick story about a transactional God who's perfect and can't stand the side of you because of your sin. This is a good God, a good father, a good mother, a good creator who looks at you and says, you're my child. It's going to take time to grow up. But as you figure out growing up, as you figure out your coping skills, as you figure out what this thing means to be human, I'm going to teach you a process of transformation along the way. This is not about not going to hell. This is not about some transaction you don't get or being scared of something or wondering if you're doing the thing right. This is about freely open access to the God of the universe, the one who looks at 100 billion galaxies and 100 billion suns with hundreds of billions of planets and waves crashing on every single one of them and a billion sunsets all at one time. This God who holds all of that and at the same time holds all of your complexity, that's the invitation. Would you want relationship with that? That's the good stuff. That's the magic. And then Jesus says, if you want relationship, this is where transformation comes out of. You not only need relationship with God, but this is something that many of us miss in the conservative world. You're going to need a relationship with yourself. Many of us were taught to love God and to love others, but we never learned to love ourselves. We were never taught that therapy was okay, or that if you do yoga, that doesn't mean that you're talking to the devil. It just means you're stretching and breathing, right? It's not that crazy, right? Hot 8 yoga was not created by the cabal. It's just a good thing maybe to enjoy for your life. That there's all kinds of wonderful ways to take care of yourself. The problem is that sometimes in the liberal world, we think that only taking care of ourselves is our healing in the world. It's not. You can do it, and you should do it. Do all of the therapy, do all of the things, find all of the ways to take care of yourself, do all of the deconstructing, but eventually you will also need relationship with God. Eventually you will need to know, you will need to know there's a power greater than yourself. I call that thing Jesus, right? And I believe that God invites us into relationship, which is beautiful. And eventually you need to learn to love others. That's the magic of relationship. That you could love yourself, that you could love God, that you could love others, and that as you grow in transformation, you'll have the capacity to do all of those things. And at different seasons of your life, you're going to do one better than the other, but the point is that you're just on the journey. And then Jesus is going to invite you into responsibility. In this one, it says they went out and preached the good news and they cast out demons. We have a casting out demons Sunday school class next week. But until that, I think what it's really saying is you're speaking against the systems of the world. You're going to go be like Jesus and do as Jesus did in the world. You're going to care for your neighbor. I can't get over that. That's what you're going to do. You're going to show up to church at the lowest point in your life, not too long after you thought, I don't deserve to live anymore, because you're willing to love yourself, and you're going to surround yourself by people who can love you and remind you of what's true. And then you can come back a year later with a great fit and remind all of us that we're loved and that we're needed. That's the gift, right, that we're invited into of transformation. You're going to go do as Jesus did. As you receive healing, as you learn to move from coping to caring, as you learn to move into transformation, you're going to go now offer that to other people. And we offer that responsibility. I'm just going to use like old school evangelical, what I was taught. I'm going to say like time, energy, and money. Those are just big things in our world. Are you being responsible with your time? You want to know one of the greatest ways to transform in our culture? Go right now, look at your phone, let it tell you the drastic pain that you're doing 2 hours of Instagram a day or whatever it may be. Reclaiming some of that time, I think, is a great way for the process of transformation. That we have time in our lives. I know that sounds like so weird. I just hate social media, by the way, so that's just me. I'm happy to say it. I think our phones are a wonderful gift. I think technology is a wonderful gift. I think also at times we're just so distracted from an opportunity of real relationship and true transformation. I think we all know that at our deepest level, and yet cat videos are fun. And so would you reclaim some time in your life? Would you be responsible to your own transformation and to the relationships that you have in your life? Would you be thoughtful about where you're putting your energy? That sometimes you don't take the job because it's not the right energy. Sometimes you say no to the relationship because it's not working for you. It's okay to have boundaries. Be thoughtful about where your energy is going in the world. Jesus did it all of the time. He would give, he'd be on the lake, he'd heal all these people, he'd do these things, and then he would go find a place to restore, to recharge, to renew. And you got to figure what that thing is out for your life. But you need to take responsibility for it, because the story is that you're creating your reality. No one else is going to go create that for you. If you think that the Jesus journey is one of osmosis, you're just going to be poorly disappointed, because nothing works that way in this world. And so you have an opportunity for responsibility. And then I think money. And that's where I'm going to end. I forgot to tell a Tiger King story. Nope, I'm going to miss it. Here we go. I'm going to tell you instead a story about our elementary school fundraiser, and how I think it speaks to me and New Abbey, and we're going to end on that. 2 weeks ago, I was at a fundraiser for my kids' elementary school. My kids go to an incredible elementary school that's really well funded because it's in some neighborhoods that can really well fund it, and it's a public school. It's a part of a school district that is not well funded and not well taken care of. And someone stood up at this elementary school fundraiser, and they said to all of us, you have the responsibility to do what every person did before you sat in this seat, to give money to this school, and here's why. And I'm like, okay, I'm listening, keep going. And they said, think about this. This school serves everybody regardless of your socioeconomics. You get to come here, you get a gardening teacher, they have a mindfulness teacher that comes, you get music, you get art, you get all of these wild things, right? Because people sat here before you and they gave money to a public school when they didn't have to, because it benefits all of the kids in the neighborhood, not just kids who could afford a private school. Okay, so now I'm listening, all right? And he just talked about, this is your responsibility. And it's not everyone's responsibility equally. If you have more, you need to give it so that every kid here has the same responsibilities. And then they ended with a paddle raise. And I've been to a lot of charities and a lot of paddle raises. A paddle raise goes like this. You go around the room making sure that every single person in the room gives something. It doesn't matter what, but the point of it is that we're all responsible for this thing. The point of the Jesus story, why he calls the 12 into it, is that in this story of transformation, you don't do it alone. That's wildly selfish to think that this whole thing is just about you. This thing is about you and your healing so that you can go offer it to other people, so that generations from now, they'll say, they sat in what kind of 1950s gym in Glendale and said, what? They modeled for us in a new way when it was a little bit ahead of time, that you could be gay and Christian, which 100 years from now, people are like, duh, you guys are crazy. Today's world, they're still, that's not allowed, right? You're modeling something different for the world. And so the responsibility of these paddle raises is that they go around, and the number that they started with that night was $2,500. If you have $2,500 to give, would you raise that paddle? And then they got down to $5. The point of it is, you're all in it. Every single paddle should be raised by the end of the night. That's the invitation that Jesus has. If you don't do it, you're not going to hell. God's not shaming you. In fact, the gospel says something completely different. That God will keep showing up in your life. God will keep finding ways to heal you. And even if you can't see it, this God will keep finding ways to be creative, even when you can't help yourself. But there will always be an invitation out there to relationship and responsibility. When you're ready, there can be more healing. There can be more transformation. There can be deep maturity if you want to participate in it. And so this God says, come to me, and you're the ones that I'm going to teach in an even deeper way because you're going to be with me in this relationship, and I'm going to show you what responsibility looks like. And I think that's my call for New Abbey, for all of us here. You are responsible. 5 years from now, there was a guy who walked into this room and he gave $100,000 a year for 2 years so that you could sit in these seats. He made space so that wherever you're at, you could sit here. I love seeing when an email comes through and it says that college kid gave $1 a month. This isn't a story. This isn't a sermon about giving, by the way. This is a sermon about you continuing to show up, you continuing to do your work, you continuing to invest in other people's lives, you choosing the invitation that's in front of you, that transformation is crucial. But it's going to take your choice to choose relationship and to choose responsibility. Do it for yourself. Do it for everyone that's here right now. Do it for everyone who's going to come 5 years from now. Do it for what the world needs. This is the invitation that Jesus has for you. Let go of a story of transaction that you can never live into. Embrace one of transformation that brings wholeness and healing into your life. Would you find the same 3 or 4 people? Answer this question for yourself. Where can you grow in relationship or responsibilities? Enjoy.